Hey everybody, tonight we're diving into a real bummer of a topic, the Russo-Ukrainian War. Now I know what you're thinking, John, it's 2024, can't we talk about something more cheerful? Like, I don't know, the inevitable robot uprising? And to that I say fair point, but this conflict is far from over, and understanding how we got here is crucial. This whole mess traces back to 2014. Remember when Putin decided Crimea looked awfully cozy, nestled within Ukraine, and just took it? Annexation, they called it. Like it was a harmless little zoning dispute and not a blatant land grab. This kicked off a chain reaction with separatist groups backed by, you guessed it, Russia stirring up trouble in eastern Ukraine. It was like watching your neighbors have a screaming match, except they were armed with tanks and the shouting was happening in Cyrillic. So, yeah, slightly more intense than your average neighborhood squabble. The international community, of course, couldn't just sit back and watch. Sanctions were imposed, diplomatic talks were held, and yet the conflict dragged on. The sanctions hit Russia hard, but they also had ripple effects across the global economy. Energy prices soared and markets became volatile. Meanwhile, the human cost was staggering. Families were torn apart, homes destroyed, and millions were displaced. Refugee camps sprang up in neighboring countries, struggling to cope with the influx of people fleeing the violence. Humanitarian aid organizations worked tirelessly to provide food, shelter, and medical care, but the need was overwhelming. Even in the midst of chaos, life had to go on. Makeshift schools were set up and communities tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Peace talks were held multiple times, but each time hopes were dashed as agreements fell apart or were never fully implemented. Interestingly, the war also sparked protests within Russia. Many Russians were against the conflict, risking arrest to voice their dissent. Social media became a battleground of its own, with people around the world showing their support for Ukraine and condemning the aggression. Countries sent aid, both military and humanitarian, to support Ukraine's efforts to defend itself and care for its people. International forces even provided training to Ukrainian soldiers, helping them to better defend their homeland. There were moments of hope, like when ceasefires were announced, but they were often short-lived, with fighting resuming soon after. Despite the ongoing conflict, the resilience of the Ukrainian people shone through. They began to rebuild, showing incredible strength and determination. Memorials were erected to honor those who had lost their lives, serving as a poignant reminder of the war's heavy toll. As we move into 2024, the hope for peace remains strong. The world watches and waits, hoping for a resolution to this long and painful conflict. So, stay tuned as we continue to follow this story and many others that will shape our world in the coming year. Thanks for watching, and let's hope for a brighter future. Now, to fully grasp this whole shebang, we need to rewind a bit further. The story of Ukraine is not just a tale of recent conflicts, it's a saga that stretches back through centuries of shifting borders, empires, and cultural transformations. See, Ukraine has always been a bit of a geopolitical football. Its strategic location has made it a coveted prize for various powers throughout history. From the Mongol invasions to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and later the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires, Ukraine has been a crossroads of influence and control. Stuck between Russia and the West, it's got this complex history and a cultural identity that Putin, for some reason, can't seem to handle. This cultural identity is a rich tapestry woven from diverse threads, including Slavic, Tatar, Jewish, and other influences. Each region of Ukraine has its own unique flavor, contributing to a national identity that is both unified and diverse. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine chose the path of independence. This was a monumental shift, as the country sought to establish its own sovereignty and direction. The early years of independence were marked by significant challenges, including economic hardships and political instability, but also a burgeoning sense of national pride and identity. But Russia, still clinging to its past glory days, wasn't too thrilled about its neighbors' westward leanings. The Kremlin viewed Ukraine's moves towards the European Union and NATO as direct threats to its sphere of influence. Diplomatic relations became increasingly strained, with Russia using a combination of political pressure, economic leverage, and military force to try and keep Ukraine within its orbit. Cue the territorial disputes, particularly over Crimea with its strategic Black Sea port. Crimea has long been a point of contention. with its majority Russian-speaking population and significant military importance. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 was a bold and controversial move that sent shockwaves through the international community. And the Donbas region, known for its industrial heartland. The Donbas has been a flashpoint of conflict, with pro-Russian separatists clashing with Ukrainian forces. The region's economic significance, due to its coal mines and heavy industry, adds another layer of complexity to the conflict. These weren't just abstract lines on a map. They represented deep-seated divisions within Ukrainian society itself. The maiden protests of 2013 to 2014, which called for closer ties with Europe, highlighted these internal divisions. The protests led to the ousting of the pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych and set the stage for the ongoing conflict. Some folks felt closer ties to Russia, while others looked towards Europe. This split is often along regional lines, with the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine leaning more towards Russia, and the western and central regions favoring European integration. These differing perspectives are rooted in historical, cultural, and economic factors that continue to shape the nation's trajectory. And wouldn't you know it, Putin saw an opportunity to exploit these cracks and wedge the country even further apart. By supporting separatist movements and using hybrid warfare tactics, Russia has sought to destabilize Ukraine and prevent it from fully integrating with the West. This ongoing struggle is not just about territory, it's about the future direction of Ukraine and its place in the world. Now, when we talk about separatist groups, let's be real, folks. These weren't exactly ragtag bands of freedom fighters. They were well organized, well equipped, and had a clear agenda. This wasn't some grassroots movement that sprang up overnight. No, this was a calculated strategic effort. They were armed, funded, and directed by, say it with me now, Russia. The level of support they received was staggering. We're talking about sophisticated weaponry, advanced training, and a steady stream of resources. This wasn't just a case of a few guns and some cash. It was a full-scale operation. It was like watching a puppet show where the puppet master wasn't even trying to hide. The strings were so obvious you could practically see them glistening in the sunlight. Every move, every action was orchestrated from behind the scenes. In 2014, Russian forces, disguised as little green men, subtle, right, rolled into Crimea. These weren't just any soldiers. They were highly trained, highly disciplined, and highly motivated. Their mission was clear, and they executed it with precision. They seized government buildings, intimidated locals, and before you could say borscht, they'd annexed the peninsula. The speed and efficiency of their operation were breathtaking. It was a textbook example of modern military strategy. Meanwhile, in eastern Ukraine, the conflict escalated into a full-blown war. What started as skirmishes and isolated incidents quickly spiraled out of control. The region became a battleground, with both sides digging in for a prolonged conflict. Tanks rumbled across the countryside, artillery rained down on cities, and civilians were caught in the crossfire. The scale of the destruction was immense. Homes, schools, hospitals, nothing was spared. The human cost was staggering. It was a stark reminder that even in the 21st century, the horrors of war were alive and well. Families were torn apart, communities were shattered, and the scars of the conflict would last for generations. The world watched in horror, but the suffering continued. The resilience of the Ukrainian people in the face of such adversity was nothing short of remarkable. They endured, they resisted, and they fought for their homeland with a determination that inspired the world. Section 4. Sanctions and Solidarity. The world reacts. The international community, to its credit, wasn't about to let Putin get away with this blatant act of aggression. The West slapped Russia with sanctions, targeting its economy and oligarchs. It was a way of saying, look, we're not going to send in troops, but we're going to make you pay for this, financially speaking. Meanwhile, countries rallied to support Ukraine, providing military aid, humanitarian assistance, and a whole lot of strongly worded condemnations at the UN. It was a rare moment of global unity, albeit one born out of tragedy. Section 5. Life in the crosshairs, the human cost of conflict. But amidst all the geopolitical maneuvering, it's easy to forget the human cost of this conflict. Thousands of innocent people, men, women, children, have lost their lives. Families have been torn apart, homes reduced to rubble, and entire communities scarred by the trauma of war. Imagine living with the constant fear of shelling, the uncertainty of displacement, the heartbreak of losing loved ones. This is the reality for millions of Ukrainians caught in the crossfire of a conflict they didn't ask for. Section 6, the fog of information propaganda and the digital battlefield. Now, this war hasn't just been fought on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine, it's also been waged in the murky realm of information warfare. Propaganda has become a weapon, with both sides trying to control the narrative and sway public opinion. Russia, in particular, has become a master of disinformation, churning out fake news, conspiracy theories, and outright lies. It's like a fire hose of BS, designed to confuse, mislead, and sow discord. This information war has further polarized opinions, making it even harder to find common ground and seek a peaceful resolution.